Hi, welcome to the What Drives You podcast. Today we have two great topics. We're going to talk about the capacity in the marketplace right now and what it takes to be a dedicated carrier. And then we're going to jump in to talking through an election year in the world of transportation. All right, guys, our first topic today is focused towards capacity and stable capacity in kind of the dedicated marketplace. So as you think about that, when you're looking at a dedicated carrier, how long should a dedicated carrier be operating before you kind of have some trust in that entity, in your opinion?
Well, I think that's a good question, Keith. And if you don't mind, Ben, I'll go first, and I'll take the easy one. But it does seem lately that every carrier thinks they're a good dedicated carrier when they don't have any real experience in dedicated. And I think it's definitely measured in years, if not decades.
Okay.
Having that experience in dedicated is a big deal because you understand the customer that you might be servicing, that they're buying this for a service reason likely, and you've got to have that attention to detail on the delivery service, which means you have to pay a lot more attention to the type of drivers, the type of individual that you put behind the wheel, the type of office associates that'll plan the work.
Right.
Do they have a focus on getting the backhauls? A lot of times with dedicated fleets, there's a backhaul need. That means that you've got to have other customer arrangements. So it's really building on year after year of experience, not only with that customer, but with a dedicated model. So then as new customers are looking at other dedicated providers, you can put a lot of trust into those that have the experience.
Great.
Yeah, I pile onto that. I would say, we've been doing dedicated for 34 years, so I think 34 years would be the scientific age for how long you should be doing dedicated to be a great carrier. But, Jared hit it, and, being in this industry for decades, talking to other carriers, it's amazing. For us, it's just been second nature. That's how we operate, and those type of things, around the backhaul, the quality of driver, the quality of equipment, it's just what we do second nature. And a number of carriers that I've talked to have found that just to be really difficult because it doesn't fit into a traditional trucking operating model.
Right.
Your headcount is different, your whole structure internally around dedicated is different than if you're running truly just OTR freight. So the point is, it takes a long time to address that. You can't turn that switch on and be good at running dedicated. And I think what we've seen really in cycles like this, specifically this last cycle, and as we wrote it down, there's a influx of carriers that claim to be dedicated or going into dedicated bids just because they want the stability, but it doesn't necessarily mean they know exactly how to operate that business.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I think the length of maybe the down market this time around maybe has more people dabbling, and you think that could be leading to some of this and it coming up more often now than maybe it has historically.
They could even be looking for a lifeline.
Okay.
Right. That they're at their wits' end, if you will, or maybe their financial end, and they need something that's stable that allows them to maybe either keep the financing they have or get more. The bottom line, though, is are they going to be there through all the cycles?
Right.
And are they going to chase the higher potential one-way margins that might exist in the future, and much like they may have done, 3-4 years ago.
Right. It's a kind of a perfect transition as far as what's going to be chased, what's not going to be chased by a carrier that's in this market or not. When you think about running dedicated, in a true dedicated carrier, how much freight or how much of their mix do you think is a good balance or a good mix to really be effective at it?
Yeah, it's hard to pick a number, but it's easy to say greater than 50%.
Right.
You want to pick a provider as your dedicated provider that has at least half maybe as high as 70% of their mix of business
Okay.
is already dedicated,
Right.
because it just demonstrates that they have that experience.
Right.
They've maintained it. And they likely have some customers that have stuck with them all 34 years, in fact.
Right.
And then they likely have some recognition from those carriers and references.
Right.
So I think, if you're a shipper out there, ask for those references, ask for that experience, and make sure that is with multiple shippers, not just one.
Right. Good. Ben, anything to add there?
No, I think his point is right on. I don't know that you can give it a percentage.
Right.
Because it really depends on the size and how big that dedicated is. But it's also important to look at the rest of the company and how they're set up. So, for example, the majority of our ancillary businesses, whether it's logistics or our OTR network, it is designed to support our dedicated network.
Right.
So even if you were to strip them out, our standalone operation would look differently than a traditional
Right.
OTR or logistics operation, because it's focused on servicing our dedicated customers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, customer transition. That may be the next question I'm going to there. When you think about who they service, and how many customers a dedicated carrier should service, what's the right mix there, and how much of a diverse customer base does a dedicated, or should a dedicated carrier really have, in your opinion?
I think it's more, I don't think there's a cap,
Okay.
right? I believe that you can service a lot of shippers well from a dedicated perspective, but you do want to have multiple shippers that you're servicing, and having more to choose from enables you to maybe create some joint utilization, look for opportunities to, maybe there's some backhauls that are head hauls with the other shipper. But I think what it comes down to is, are you getting the attention that you deserve from the dedicated providers? So everybody's ability to spread their attention out varies. So I think it's up to the shipper to determine, does my carrier, are they spread too thin, right?
Okay.
And I think they need to ask themselves that. And you had talked earlier a little bit about, and Ben was talking about, our ancillary services are built on dedicated. And,
Right.
and that's one of the challenges I have as we look to work with other shippers out there that we know have dedicated.
Right.
Oftentimes we're asked to participate first on the inbound.
Right.
And, what we would prefer, if we could, is to participate on the dedicated and then have our ancillary services support that dedicated fleet that we start up with that particular shipper. So I don't think there's too many. I think it's just, do you have one that is diversified, has different options, and has the other service offerings that can allow you to buy a one-way movement when you need it?
That makes sense. So you brought up a good point. The kind of the typical purchasing model, or the road into that. Why do you think that is? I mean, why start one way to then move into dedicated, and what can be some of the differences or maybe reasons to do it that way, or maybe not to do it that way? Any thoughts there?
Well, unfortunately, I think sometimes that's the easiest way to have a carrier go away.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I think it's because it is random one-way movement. There is no
Okay.
contract needed. There is a sense of maybe that carrier, they're not confident in them. So if we give them this one lane, we
Right.
can quickly pull that lane away from them. Whereas if you go in on a dedicated arrangement, it's much more of a commitment.
Okay.
It takes a lot more time and effort. And it might be more time and effort than that shipper has at that point in time. And we
Okay.
understand that. So it's likely just a way to get in the door, and then we can cross that bridge later when we might have more time and more experience working with you.
Great.
Yeah, just comment on, so the number of dedicated shippers. I think Jared had some really good points there. I think that that is a valid question that shippers should be asking that carrier. And it's as important just in terms of, their long-term sustainability. If they have one shipper that they
Right.
do dedicated, now that whole company may be, pending their size and scope, may be at risk
Right.
if there was a change with that one. So I think it's a valid question just to be asking the carriers, hey, what is the book of your dedicated business look like? And then you can determine kind of the stability that they have in place.
Great. All right, we're going to move into our second topic, which I'm a little more excited about because I think I'm excited about both, but I'm just saying I think this is a little bit of a hot topic right now. We're in an election year, and there's a lot of talk about kind of what's going on in the marketplace, what in our marketplace hinges on the election, etc. So we're gonna jump in there. So first question I have for you both is, how do election years, in not just this year, but historically, how have they impacted our industry, and how do you think it's impacting us this time around?
Well,
Go ahead.
I actually think the question is somewhat irrelevant because
Okay.
I do not believe that the fact that there's an election actually dynamically changes the freight industry at all. If you go back and look at history, go back to 2008. We knew what was happening entering into 2008, and we had this great meltdown of the housing market,
Right.
And that wasn't because of the election that took place. And I think if you look back at others, it's the same way. If you go back to 2016, during 2015, there was this significant decline in industrial production that happened as a result of the oil and gas, and all the buildup around oil and gas kind of came to a screeching halt during that time. And then you went into this election in 2016, and so it wasn't the election that caused a change in that cycle. And then obviously the latest 2020, I don't think anybody could say the election caused what we went through. So when you look back at the previous elections and you see our industry is very highly cyclical, and it's become even more cyclical as the Amazon effect and how people are getting their goods have changed, and that's just a reality. So I believe it's more of the market cycles of the trucking market that drive it way more than the fact that an election's coming up.
Yeah. Well, I'll take a different position.
Okay.
I like to debate.
Yeah.
Like back in 2008, we might have debated this as well. But I think if anything, it just delays a lot of things. There's uncertainty as to what's going to happen. And I think the way it impacts transportation is more driven by the industries that it might be impacting. So as a carrier, you might be tied to certain industries more than others. So I do think some carriers are definitely impacted by the election more so than others. Maybe carriers that were very tied into the oil and gas industry over the last 5-6 years, one could say, have been impacted by the elections, and maybe not. But I do think that it delays, it creates uncertainty, and there could be impacts. They're just not broad. They're more targeted and specific depending upon the industry.
Okay, good. So I'm gonna go to you first, Jared. I think we're gonna.
Well, I would say he's right. He's right in this one point that what he's describing in terms of. I understand that maybe people are delaying some things, but I don't know that that's disrupting the freight market. I think, fundamentally, it's what happens after if there's major changes in positions, whether it's positions on imports or the oil and gas industry, or I won't say interest rates, but there's impacts that are a result of new agendas, much more so than the election itself.
Right.
So
he has a point there.
Okay.
But I think the election, certainly it gets a lot of media attention, and it just creates more uncertainty more than anything else.
Well, I don't ever recall talking about this. In past elections, I just think, it's top of mind for everybody right now, just because this election just seems to be so much more polarizing than previous. So I think it's creeping into people's mind in terms of what effect this is going to have. But again, I think it's less about the election and more about the fundamentals of the economy.
All right, so maybe not a cause and effect, directly tied here, but maybe some things that can certainly change or will change after the fact. Okay, so you brought up freight volumes, so I'm just going to kind of jump there in regards to this. So are there any specific factors during election years that cause fluctuations in freight? I mean, I think, Jared, you alluded to, there are some things that may be kind of pending or waiting or hinging. Anything that you believe is tied to our current volume state and the fact that we're waiting on this election to happen?
No, I don't think there's anything that you could draw like a cause and effect that is causing the current freight environment to change based on the election in November. So I would say it's just more uncertainty and I don't have any specific examples,
right?
But I suspect there could be some manufacturing or retailers or other industries that might be waiting on an investment based on what happens in the election. Or maybe they're waiting on the timing. They want to understand what's happening in a specific state. It might not even be federal.
Right.
And then there's certainly international stuff as well that we have to be aware of. But hey, we're in a global economy.
Right.
And I do think that some of that plays a role in determining what shippers do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think on that point that really it's, the uncertainty is, interest rates in that equation is probably a much bigger factor than the election in the uncertainty. Everybody's expecting rates to come down.
Right.
The housing market is basically frozen right now and it needs some interest rate relief. But that's a huge driver of truckload volume when the housing industry gets going. So again, a lot of that pause and uncertainty is probably caused by the interest rates more so than who's going to win.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, so much goes into those rates and like you said, the housing market, Ben, and what happens with purchasing after a home purchase and as part of a home purchase, right? That makes a lot of sense. So, so maybe let's jump into maybe post-election, right? So, as you think about the anticipation of change in regulation, change in tax policy, and the overall standing of our industry, what things there do you think companies are thinking about, and or is that maybe the hinge pin that's has more effect after the fact, right? When you see policy change, you see tax regulation change, or some other things. Maybe just speak on that a little bit and what you've seen after prior elections, and then what you think may occur after this one.
I think it's going to be predicated on consumer demand and the health of the consumer, and all the talk of the soft landing, whether we have one or not, I don't know because it's not clearly defined what that means.
Okay.
But it's truly gonna, I think, hinge on the job market and the health of the consumer. And if that remains healthy, you're gonna see a creep up in demand over time. If that changes drastically, and I don't think the election's gonna change that.
Okay.
But that would be, that would just further the down cycle here.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would maybe just extrapolate a little more. Ben brought up employment. I think that largely over the last year and a half, 2 years longer has been very good. Right. And only recently have we seen some headwinds when it comes to unemployment news and some layoffs, and that's unfortunate. Meanwhile, in our industry, we have plenty of openings, right? We are seeking qualified individuals in many different markets to drive for us, as well as work in the office. And so I think there's plenty of industries that do need and have great jobs and well-paying jobs. And I think it's just a matter of do we have the right skill set, the right training, and are the individuals in the right geographic area as well? So I think as you dive in deeper, it's by industry and then it's by region. I think we're seeing a lot of strength in some states, and in others it's a little softer. So all in all, I think the job market's going to be the one that I would keep the closest eye on. Next, looks like interest rates they're going to address, but the job market was what concerns me, because if manufacturing starts to lose more jobs here in the United States, I don't think that bodes well for us. Right,
that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you both for your insight on the topics today. Anything else that either one of you want to add as final thoughts on maybe the election capacity, where things are at right now in the marketplace?
No, you did a great job, Keith. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both for joining. All right, and thanks for joining us again here on the What Drives You podcast.